Sherlock Holmes is undoubtedly one of fiction's most popular characters, having been portrayed by over 200 actors on the screen over the years and having served as the inspiration for other characters such as Batman and Adrian Monk. And it's no wonder why we're so fascinated with him. Yes, his stories contain lots of mystery and adventure, but he's also a character who can make logical deductions from the most scant evidence, and we find that inherently fascinating. We find characters who are hyper-intelligent to be really interesting. And what's better about Sherlock Holmes, he's not superhuman, he is human. Which leads me to the point of this video, because if you're anything like me, you've probably gone beyond simple fascination with the character at one point or another and thought to yourself, how can I think like Sherlock Holmes? You know, without all the sociopathic tendencies and the substance abuses, just the good parts. Well, that is what I want to explore in this video. And by the end of it, you're gonna understand 3 of the core mental strategies that Holmes brought to his cases: deep observation, skepticism, and probabilistic thinking. The first strategy on my list is also probably the most famous one. Holmes is a keen observer of his environment. He doesn't just casually see or perceive his environment like the rest of us. He observes it with scrutiny, taking it all in and storing away details that other people would miss entirely or forget really quickly. This well-trained power of observation allows him to tie together all those small details in order to make conclusions. And this is a skill that's useful not just in detective work, but in almost any field. So here's how you can build this skill for yourself. First, be an active participant in whatever's going on in your life. Try to be as present-minded as you can. When you're having a conversation with somebody else, try to listen actively. Try to formulate questions in your head that dig into what they're saying. And when you're traveling around or going about your business, don't be staring at your phone or otherwise dividing up your attention. Try to be present-minded and observe your environment. Like many other cognitive skills, observation is a habit that can be strengthened over time. The author W.I.B. Beveridge puts it really well in his book, The Art of Scientific Investigation. Training in observation follows the same principles as training in any activity. At first, one must do things consciously and laboriously, but with practice, the activities gradually become automatic and unconscious, and a habit is established. Right now, most of us aren't very well trained in the art of observation. We divide up our attention, we multitask. So again, if you want to get better at this, be as present-minded as you can. And to get specific, I do want to give you one little challenge to take away from this video. Next time you sit down to eat, next time you sit down at the table, don't take out your phone at all. Not only will this force you to be present-minded, not dividing your attention with your phone, whoever's at the table, but it'll also force you to make conversation, so you'll be building your social skills as well. Now, aside from mindfulness, there's one other critical piece to building those observational skills, and that's to gain experience in whatever field that you want to be really perceptive and observational in. Experts naturally pick out details that are relevant to them in situations and environments that the average person just isn't going to see. Think about how actually, I can't say this word. What is it?
Classeur.
Yeah, that. Somebody who practices the art of parkour would look at the average urban environment versus how a normal pedestrian would look at it. While you and I would just see roads and sidewalks and buildings and other people, somebody who's an expert in parkour is going to see a lot more naturally. They're going to see the most efficient way to get from point A to point B, whether it's ducking under a railing or vaulting over something, climbing up a wall, and you and I are just not going to see that. Now, this tip is pretty related to another quality that Sherlock Holmes emphasizes a lot: a background knowledge across many different fields that's both deep and, most importantly, according to Holmes himself, well curated. This is a concept that Holmes calls the brain attic, and here's how he describes it in A Study in Scarlet. I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things, so that he has difficulty in laying his hands upon it. Now, the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. Now, I don't think you need to be paranoid about taking in the wrong things, as the brain is pretty elastic and you're really not going to fill it up as such. But you do want to make sure that you're focusing on the most important things for the majority of your time. Most of us have that one person in our life that's a master of useless trivia, but hasn't really put a whole lot of time into developing a useful skill. Don't be that person. Put the majority of your time and energy and focus into gaining useful information, and when you do, learn actively. Take notes, summarize what you learn, and try to put it into practice as soon as you can. Additionally, you want to be exploring lots of other subjects that are somehow related to your main subject. Doing this will form lots of additional neural connections and build a really deep web of information in your brain. And memories that have lots of different connections are both more likely to be retrieved and more likely to be combined with the problem at hand to come up with a creative solution. As the famous investor and partner of Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, said, "The first rule is that you can't really know anything if you just remember isolated facts and try and bang them back. If the facts don't hang together on a latticework of theory, you don't have them in a usable form." The second mental strategy of Sherlock Holmes that we're going to cover today is skepticism. The Athenian playwright Euripides once wrote that man's most valuable trait is a judicious sense of what not to believe. And Sherlock Holmes brings a natural skepticism to every case that he faces. He listens to his clients or observes the details of a case or crime scene deeply and scientifically, but he also compares what he's seen and observed to his current model of reality and all of his background knowledge. But on the other hand, as studies have found, most of us can't help but instinctively believe what we hear right when we hear it, especially if we're put in stressful situations or we're put under time pressure. Not only that, but our brains also rely on lots of different little cognitive biases and heuristics, mental shortcuts that are very useful in many different situations, especially as the human species evolved, but that can also lead to incorrect decision-making and bad thinking. For instance, we tend to weight the information that is available to us much too heavily. That's called the availability heuristic. We also tend to believe things if we know a lot of other people believe them, the bandwagon effect. And we also rely heavily on stereotypes. In fact, a recent study in the journal Criminology, which I think Holmes probably would have read, found that certain physical traits are correlated with sentencing decisions. This being despite the fact that, logically, we all know that our physical appearance has nothing to do with whether or not we committed a crime. And that isn't even half of it. Environmental factors that you wouldn't expect also have the ability to really influence our decision-making. For instance, prospective students that visit a college campus on a cloudy day are more likely to enroll in that college than if they did on a sunny day. And people who are affected by seasonal affective disorder tend to make more risk-averse decisions with their money during the winter months than they do during the summer months. Now, with all these natural flaws in our thinking, how can we actually think objectively? Well, one powerful strategy comes from the author Maria Konnikova, who wrote the book Mastermind: How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, which was, as you might guess, one of the big inspirations for this video. Her advice is to actively work on noticing what is priming your thoughts and influencing your decisions. As she states in the book, a prime stops being a prime once we're aware of its existence. Bring any attention at all to the priming mechanism and you'll likely find the effect go down to zero. When we are aware of the reason for our action, it stops influencing us. And as a little add-on to that piece of advice, make sure that when you come to a conclusion, you can point to the logical deduction or the observable evidence that caused it. If you can't, then it's a good sign that you're relying on one of those cognitive biases and that you should probably work through the problem a little bit more deliberately again. Finally, Sherlock Holmes' ability to make deductions and solve cases hinges on his ability to think in terms of probabilities. What is most likely to happen? When Holmes is working on a case, he thinks like a scientist and uses the scientific method, forming hypotheses as he goes along and testing them against new data as it's discovered. And since that data is almost never 100% conclusive, he generates many different hypotheses, and then he tries to figure out which one is the most likely candidate. Now, this probabilistic thinking is also called inductive reasoning. While deductive reasoning uses certainty and sound logic to reach conclusions that are 100% true, inductive reasoning asks what is the most likely answer given the facts. And again, since most complex problems in life usually rely on incomplete information, you need to be able to use inductive reasoning just as much as you need to be able to use deductive reasoning. Now, if you want to see this probabilistic thinking in action in one of the Holmes stories, The Sign of Four has a great example. It starts when Dr. Watson hands Holmes a pocket watch and asks what he can deduce from it. After looking the watch over for a few seconds, Holmes replies with quite a lot of information actually, that the watch was originally owned by Watson's father, then passed down to his elder brother. Also that his older brother had certain periods of his life that were prosperous, but spent most of it in poverty and probably ended up dying of alcoholism. Now, this deduction turns out to be extremely accurate, and at first, Watson is offended, thinking that Holmes had actually dug into his personal life and that he was being a charlatan. But Holmes insists that he didn't even know Watson had a brother until looking at the watch. All of his deductions were based on the observations he gained from the watch and probabilistic thinking. Now, if you're curious about all these details, I highly recommend going and reading the story since it is public domain. You can read it for free, but for an example, he does note that the alcoholism deduction came from the fact that there were scratches around the keyhole, and a sober man would have never put scratches on the keyhole because he wouldn't have missed the keyhole when trying to open the watch. And moving away from the realm of fiction, if you want a more practical example, I found that probabilistic thinking can actually help you find things that you've lost a lot more quickly than the most commonly recommended solution, which is to mentally retrace your steps. Now, that can work pretty well, but it encourages linear thinking, which can waste time. If you think probabilistically and you ask yourself, what is the most likely place I would have, say, taken out my wallet? What is the most likely place I was really distracted and might have set it down? You may end up finding it faster, and that could be the difference between somebody picking it up and making off with it and you actually getting it back. Now, there are lots of other techniques that Sherlock Holmes used, which we could do tons of different videos on. But one of them, which Sherlock would have surely used in his investigations, and which is very closely related to probability, is game theory. And if you'd like to find out what game theory is and how you can use it as an extremely effective decision-making tool for solving problems, you should definitely check out this video that I made with my friend Jade over at her channel, Up and Atom. Not only will the video teach you about game theory in general, but because it uses multiple choice questions as a case study, you're also going to learn a technique that'll help you potentially get fewer wrong answers on your own tests in the future. And by the way, it is not something I talked about in my multiple choice video, so you're definitely going to want to check it out. Also, you might notice that there is not an ad at the end of this video. That's because I made this video as part of Skillshare's Spotlight program, where they use their time and ad budget to help highlight small creators who are doing great things. Jade's channel is in the spotlight this month, and it focuses on topics like physics and math and cryptography and lots of other cool stuff. So if you enjoyed this video on game theory, definitely subscribe to her channel. In fact, I'm not going to put any of the other call to action things I usually put in my videos here because I want you to just go watch this video and subscribe to Jade. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one.